Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Boczkowski with IAB Europe. Thank you to all of you who made it to this webinar. We will be starting shortly. In particular, I would like to welcome our speaker, Scott Spencer, who's the Director of Sustainable Advertising, and Jan Hardrath, Publisher Solutions Specialist for Central Europe at Google. Scott and Jan are here to tell us more about how Google supports and leverages the Better Ad standards unveiled by the Coalition for Better Ads. As a reminder, this is important here, on 15th of February, Google started to implement its plan for the Chrome browser to filter ads. And in that sense, we are hoping for this session to be an opportunity not only for Scott and Jan to provide an exhaustive overview of their work, but also answer to questions that surely are there. And as IAB Europe, we have been doing our fair share of work evangelizing the marketplace about the standards. So I can say personally that it is not uncommon for colleagues in the field to have indeed quite a few questions. So we are also looking to a Q&A session after their presentation. And before I hand over to Scott and Jan, I would like to stress a couple of points, and I will use slides for ease of reference. Hopefully you are able to see the screen that I'm sharing with the participants. So first, we will be talking about Google's approach at this very point in time, but it's obviously important that we ought not to forget about the bigger picture. The Better Ad standards, now leveraging views of over 25,000 of European respondents, are a product of the coalition, and as such, they are supported by a broad range of stakeholders on a cross-industry and global level. Second of all, the aforementioned standards, which you hopefully can see in the screen right now, they are applicable in Europe and North America, and they concern 12 ad formats in desktop web and mobile web environments. These are the standards. These are the ad formats for which for several months now the industry has been invited to weed out and stop using. Third, there is probably no denying that the enforcement of the standards through the browser sends a very powerful message to the marketplace, but we also should not forget that the uptake of the standards relies heavily on the industry support. Ideally, broad cross-industry support, and as such, the further promotion of the standards should be seen as a collective effort. So it is interesting, for instance, to observe how colleagues in the UK or France decided to recommend compliance with the standards as part of their broader compliance programs, or seals, if you like. In the slide, you can see references to IAB UK Gold Standards and France's Digital Ad Trust. There will surely be more opportunities to talk about these programs on another occasion. We will obviously focus on Google's initiative to support the standards this afternoon. And finally, there are a number of useful steps that many players in the chain, publishers probably in particular and in the first instance, can do to ensure compliance. These would include self-audit, constant monitoring of compliance, and keeping abreast of the Coalition for Better Ads updates. And I believe that Scott and Jan will also elaborate on some similar recommendations during their presentation. We are also happy to share these notes, these presentations, slide decks after the webinar with all the participants. For housekeeping rules, all attendees, but for panelists, are muted by default. You will be able, however, to ask questions through the chat function. So without further ado, I will be passing on to Scott and Jan, and looking forward to hearing from to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. And while in the background, hopefully we'll be able to get the presentation up and transfer it over to Jan. Let me just start by first saying a huge thank you to Greg, to Townie, and to the team at IAB Europe for inviting us to talk to this audience about what we are doing in support of the Better Ad standard, as well as thank you to looks like we're at about 120 people who have decided to join us for the next hour to talk through what's going on with regards to the Better Ad standard and Google's support of it. Just to keep voices along with the names, I'm Scott Spencer, Director of Sustainable Advertising here at Google, member of the Coalition for Better Ads and a few other organizations, and my colleague Jan will be helping to present this and share with you guys how we are helping to support the standard. So with that, let's jump into it. Let's see if we can get slides to go. There we go, great. So the first thing we have to all understand when we're talking about the Coalition for Better Ads, we're talking about the Better Ad standards or anything that Google's doing, is the challenge that we are all facing as an industry. No matter where you look around the world, ad blockers are now in the 20 to 30%, and sometimes, certainly in places in Europe, hitting 50% of consumers on the web. That is a dramatic impact to the web ecosystem, something that we are at Google very concerned about because we're a search company, we're an advertising company. We need to make sure that the concept of an open and ad-supported web ecosystem is sustainable, is something that will be able to continue for many years to come, so that we have stuff to search, so we have websites that we can work with to be ad-supported, and we can continue to enable consumers to get that great access in a relatively frictionless way. So when we saw these trends in terms of ad blocking, we had to start asking ourselves, what's going on? Why are consumers feeling compelled, feeling this need to install an ad blocker and effectively change how their pages are rendered and take this action, which, while simple to do, is something that they are doing in reaction to something. So we wanted to try to understand what was going on. The next slide. So the first thing we wanted to do was really understand what was driving consumer behavior. We weren't the only ones who were curious to understand what was driving consumer behavior. It turned out there was a whole bunch of companies out there that really wanted to understand what was going on to drive consumers to install ad blockers. And through sharing of research across all of the different people that were initially part of the Coalition for Better Ads, we quickly compared notes to understand that ad experience was by far the largest driver of consumer frustration, and that ad blocking was really a symptom of what was a bad user experience online. And it was interesting to have research that came from IAB Tech Lab, that came from Washington Post, came from other entities in this, all basically saying there are multiple factors. Privacy can be important, latency, other things can matter, but the number one thing on everybody's list was this question about ad experiences. And so then the Coalition for Better Ads came together to try and figure out, can we really understand from consumers what is the ad experiences that are frustrating consumers and driving them to want to install an ad blocker? It would seem somewhat obvious to say, well, okay, we all know what's annoying to consumers. Why is this such a big challenge? But turned out we didn't. And I think actually the research was really interesting in terms of what Greg just showed. I don't think anyone would have anticipated exactly what was on the list or not on the list from those particular experiences. And so it was really great to have something as a really data-driven, consumer-based, and objective assessment of exactly what it is that it's annoying consumers. So now we all could know, really, a pop-up is annoying, and here's what the pop-up looks like that's annoying. That it's not density of 50% or at 10%, but we have a specific understanding of what the density of ads are that becomes too annoying for consumers on mobile. These this information was incredibly critical to really being able to understand what's annoying consumers and then to hopefully move the needle to actually improve things overall. Now, having that standard is a critical and necessary first step, but it's not sufficient. I think everyone recognized that having such a standard and saying, great, these are the ads that annoy consumers, we can all look at that, we can all read that, but it doesn't actually help the ecosystem because it's very hard for any individual publisher to take action. Advertisers simply will say, well, I'll go run that ad someplace else. Who will still accept that ad experience? It's very hard for any individual advertiser to take action because some other agency, some other advertiser may use an experience that is not necessarily part of the standard because they're trying to get some sort of return or trying to get some sort of experience out there. And so it was something where we really needed to support this across the industry in order to really help to move the needle. So the next slide here, we wanted to look at how do we do two things. How do we help the industry to get rid of and take action on ads that were frustrating consumers? How do we help the industry to remove the annoying ads that were identified by the Better Ad Standard? And then on the flip side, how do we help those good publishers, which, as we'll get into the data, turns out to be the vast majority of publishers, in terms of being able to address those ad blocking users and be able to get them back? And so when we looked at what we could do for these different pieces, we really wanted to try and help reduce the demand, help inform people in the industry what was going on in terms of the ad experience on their own site, and then help to address annoying ads, as well as to help those be able that have ad blocking users be able to address those. So what did we try to do? We basically are looking at ways to reduce demand for ad blocking across the ecosystem by helping publishers understand what ad experiences may be in violation of the Better Ad Standard, how they can take action against those, and then how we can help those who have good ad experiences be able to get their consumers back to a way that's actually helping them to see their see ads and be ad supported again. So with those pieces, the first thing that's the most critical on that is being able to explain to publishers what's going on their own site. And so to explain how we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Jan, who will talk about the first part of our program, which is the ad experience report. You can find his mute.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yep.
Great. So let me spend the next minutes on how this really works together and how those different pieces fit together. So as Greg and Scott already mentioned, the coalition did the research and put together the Better Ad Standards, like the compelling research and guidelines for the ads industry. Sorry, does it work? Yeah. What we do with the ad experience report, really at high level, is we use those standards, we interpret those standards, and use them in order to review websites. And then last but not least, based on the ad experience report, Chrome will decide on whether they're going to start filtering ads on failing websites or if they take no action on parsing or warning websites. But since we are talking about those different pieces, the Better Ad Standards at the coalition at the high level, and then the ad experience report at Google level and Chrome as the third part of this initiative. Let's spend some time on the ad experience report and where things stand. So let's start really with the findings so far. I mean, the ad experience report is out for some time now, and the findings are really interesting, I believe. So here you can see an illustration of how many websites have a warning or failing status based on over 100,000 sites evaluated in Europe and North America. You can really see that it's just a tiny piece, like 0.5% of publisher websites with a warning status, and a bit over 0.5, like 0.8%, almost 1% just with a failing status in those two regions. In fact, within those failing websites, we also see a very positive momentum that publishers are updating their bad ad experiences and really get rid of those that are annoying users. And they are trying to adhere to the standards and trying to get rid of the main driver of ad blocking. So really, if it comes to Chrome filtering in the next stage, it's really just about the sites that do not improve ad experiences on their websites, which is based on the data we have, like 50% of the failing sites overall. And if you're curious about what do we find the most, here is like the latest snapshot we have of the ad experience report at a high level. On desktop, it's mainly pop-up windows or pop-up ads that are causing the failing statuses. On mobile, it's a bit different. It's mainly pop-ups, and also ads density is the main driver of user annoyance. So let's have a look at the ad experience report interface. Remember, the ad experience report is a tool based in the Search Console, in the web tools, where you can have a look at your website status and on those experiences that we found to be annoying, or that we've identified that are annoying to users. This is a real screenshot out of a test for test site of the ad experience report, and you can see once experiences are identified as being a pop-up or having a high ad density, etc., you will see a description of what we found, and also you can find like a deeper description, often connected to a video. We do not have videos for each and every example that we found. However, we are working on giving as much information as possible for each experience that we found that's not complying with the ad experience report. Sorry, with the better ad standard, of course. Also, since everyone is making mistakes, if there is an ad misidentified, or if there's an experience misidentified that's clearly not an ad, for example, a pop-up content recommendation, then you can use this tool to also tell us that we've misidentified an experience. So basically what you have to do is you click on the example and you say, no, this isn't an ad, this is something else, a newsletter subscription page, for example. Also, if there's a failing status or warning status that you want to get rid of and that you want to get off your websites, of course you can do so. And then request a review so that our review team will come back to your website and see if everything is okay. Once that's done, your warning or failing status will disappear. And in case that there was a failing status active and the website would be, like the failing status would be active for more than 30 days, then of course, with a review and with a successful review, you would get the ad filtering turned off again, and ads could show again on your websites. There's also an API existent for the ad experience report. The API really gives a high-level information on what are the websites with a failing status or a warning status, and this is public, so everyone can use this. For example, publishers can use this to build up a monitoring system for their own websites in order to not go to every website all the time, but to have like a high-level monitoring system on their root domains in order to know when there's a status change on your websites. Again, the API is just showing warning and failing, so there's no passing status here. So that's been a quick overview on the ad experience report. Next is Chrome filtering. So how does this work? And I'm going to pass over to Scott again.
Thank you, Jan. So as Jan mentioned, the first piece, and probably the most critical piece of what we're doing to support the Better Ad Standard, is the ad experience report. That ad experience report is available to any publisher on the web. It's only available to them, but we make it available to any publisher through a simple way to get access to our Search Console, which is where that report resides. And just as a note, it's along with all of the other information that we provide publishers about things we know about their site. So today we will tell somebody if their site's mobile friendly. Today we may help someone to understand if there's latency issues with their site. And today we will also enable them to see their ad experience report to get information about whether or not there's compliance with the Better Ad Standard. All of that information is provided to them in the Search Console, and you can go in there for any publisher to get your login to be able to review that information, in addition to the public API that Jan mentioned. Now, also as Jan mentioned, when we look at the data shows that a small subset of the publishers in the world are non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard. Of the 0.8 that was mentioned, as Jan said, about half, it's actually slightly more than half of people are actually complying with it. So we're dealing with less than 0.4% of publishers who have been told that they are non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard through our ad experience report, and yet have taken no action to address those ad experiences, making them now intentionally non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard. Interesting to note, when people are told that they're non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard and want to make a change, we've seen their ability to make those changes occur in as quickly as 2 or 3 days, and typically within a week, publishers are able to take the feedback from the Better Ad Standard, make changes on their site, and get rid of any non-compliance that's occurring. So it's something that publishers can react to, and we've seen a lot of publishers react to, but there is a subset that we anticipated would not make those changes. For that subset, for the less than 0.4% of those publishers that have been told that they're non-compliant, found to be non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard, and intentionally maintain that, that's where Chrome filtering kicks in. So what does Chrome filtering look like? So we started this in February, and what Chrome filtering does is the first thing it says is we're going to, if you're failing and you've been failing for at least 30 days, so you have to have had that 30-day time period. If we find somebody who's now non-compliant as a new entity, we're not going to immediately start to filter. We give them 30 days to go and address that ad experience. But if someone has been non-compliant and maintained that non-compliance for 30 days, then Chrome filtering will start to work. And Chrome filtering works exactly like our pop-up blocking works. It's based off the same technology. It's the same basic concept. Today, if you're on a mobile site or a site where there is a pop-up, Chrome will block the pop-up from happening, and we'll give you a little indicator in the corner saying, hey, pop-up has been blocked. Click here for more information. And then, of course, you can go and decide if you want to disable that on that site, if you want to enable the pop-up to occur, or in this case, if you want to enable ads to continue running even if they're non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard. So we have all of those elements enabled in terms of the mechanisms of what that does. That's basically what we are doing to help the industry for those publishers that are non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard. So the first thing, of course, is the ad experience report, which says, are you compliant or not compliant with the Better Ad Standard? The second thing is, for those that are non-compliant and intentionally maintain that non-compliance, we have Chrome filter. What I want to do now is shift over to talk about the 98.5% of the world, the vast majority of publishers who are actually compliant with the Better Ad Standard and are doing the right thing. For those publishers, for those that have ad blocker users coming to their site, we want to help those publishers to try and get back the revenue. And we look at this as now, these publishers, the vast majority, are victims of the fact that today's traditional ad blockers block all ads across all sites. And it may have been an ad experience on some other site, one of those 1% before 0.8% that had the bad experiences, those that are maintaining those bad ad experiences, that make the consumer decide, oh, that's really annoying. I'm going to install an ad blocker. I don't want to see ads anymore. Well, once they do that, they've turned off ads for everywhere. For most of the people in this webinar, for your sites, you get affected because the users made that choice. And so we want to help to make a method for consumers, for publishers who are doing the right thing to get back that opportunity. So how does this work? We basically say, for those sites, first, that are adhering to the Better Ad Standard, we're not going to help anybody who's non-compliant with the Better Ad Standard. That doesn't make sense. But the vast majority of sites are compliant with the Better Ad Standard. We want to help to put messaging in front of consumers to say, hey, we see you blocking ads on this site. We're doing the right thing. Let's try and find an option that works for you as a consumer to be able to allow us to provide content. So the first thing we're going to do is detect the users to understand what is the right message to be giving that consumer. If the consumer is using an ad blocker, was one option we can do. If they're not using an ad blocker, there's no messaging required. Obviously, that's today's world. GDPR, of course, can change some of these things, and messaging may be something to do in that world. But for now, for consumers that are not doing ad blocking, there's no messaging required. There's no action required. They're going to the website. They're seeing ads on that site, and the publisher's getting the revenue that they need in order to continue to provide that content. For the subset of consumers who are using an ad blocker, we want to offer the publisher a tool to be able to message to those consumers, to be able to say, hey, we're doing the right thing. We don't have annoying ad experiences on our site, but you seem to have an ad blocker from someplace else. Let me give you some choice, Mr. Consumer. Let me give you the option to either disable your ad blocker, please whitelist and come to my site, or let me give you an alternative. If you really don't like ads, here's the opportunity where you can come to my site, still maintain no ads, but you have to pay me in order to have that experience. There's a couple of ways to do that, and we're enabling that through a solution that we have, which is called Contributor, which is just a tool that lets the publisher offer to the consumer the ability to pay to get access to that site and not see ads. Alternately, some publishers have subscription services and are willing to let someone maintain an ad blocker so long as that consumer is paying for their subscription service. And we can support that kind of model as well. The idea here is to give consumers choice, to be able to let them understand, hey, you're getting access to something that is free, that is of value when you come to my site. I need to be compensated for that. So what does this sort of look like in terms of that messaging framework? We've made a messaging framework that's highly configurable by publishers. We don't think this is a one-size-fits-all kind of problem. We think this is something where publishers need to be able to experiment with and try different things. So what do I mean by that? Some of the variables we have are, do you want this messaging to be blocking, or do you want this message to be more of a nag or a suggestion? And so the option of the messaging can be dismissible, or it can be made so that it's blocking the content. You can't get through the messaging without doing it. We also allow publishers to select how many times that will happen. So you can decide that first I'm going to show it 3 times, and then it becomes a hard wall before you can access to my site. Or a publisher can decide that I'm going to keep it on for 100 times. They will continue to suggest to someone to please turn off their ad blocker. They may never decide to go to the position of having it be a blocking process, or they can immediately go to the blocking process. And so that's an important element in terms of figuring out what kind of messaging you want to do for your consumers and how you want to do that. The other piece is that we want to make sure it's explicit that there's a choice. As I mentioned before, there's 2 options here. We're trying to say either please whitelist the site on your ad blocker, or there's the option to pay to not see ads. And that's a very deliberate decision because most consumers do not understand, do not get what we in the industry think of as the implicit contract between a publisher and a consumer. that you get my site's content, which has taken me lots of time and effort to put together, and in return, you're going to be viewing ads that help me monetize that content. Consumers do not understand this. When we asked consumers about blocking advertising on a site, who did they think was impacted? It was a small percentage. It was not the majority that expected the publisher to be impacted. They weren't really sure if it was the advertiser, if it's the publisher, if somebody else, the browser. Some people thought. No one really knew as consumers who gets harmed by this. And so by making this choice explicit, you are getting a free article. This is your first of N free articles on this site. We make explicit to the consumer the idea of, oh, I'm getting something that somehow I need to be compensating someone for. And because I've got an ad blocker, I'm not compensating them. So now I've got to go change that. And again, you can give away as many articles as you want, but the implicit contract between consumer and publisher is made very explicit. The other powerful thing that this does is most consumers have no idea what that value is in terms of monetary elements. Is it €5 per article that I'm getting from ads, or is it a Eurocent? They don't understand anything in terms of what that looks like. By giving the option to buy an ad removal pass, which has a price associated with it, consumers are very quickly educated so that they can understand, oh, if I have to pay to not see ads, it's going to cost me €1 per article. I guess that's the value of advertising. I now understand implicitly exactly what it is that I'm costing this publisher by having my ad blocker installed and not seeing ads and not paying to get access to that content. What we've done in this messaging framework is a whole bunch of pieces to both educate the consumer, make the choice clear to them about what they can do, and solve that conundrum of how do you get someone aware that they're getting something for free without sort of making it too obvious, without having to have a confrontational perspective with the consumer, setting something up that's very nice. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of choice options here for the publisher about how they want to set it up. How many times do you have the messaging go before it becomes a blocking message? What is the price that you're going to do for it? How do you configure these things? And those all matter in terms of what the impact is going to be of this. So the impact in terms of how many of those ad blocking users can you get back? So we've actually had some pretty good success on this. When visitors hit the hard wall, and that could be after they've seen the soft wall, the dismissible option multiple times, or that could be just the beginning, we're seeing a 30% whitelist rate, meaning that a third of those users are now saying, okay, I'm going to turn off my ad blocker, and I'm going to decide to allow ads back on the site. Before it's a blocking process, if you're just talking about it dismissible, even then, we see a 15% reclamation of consumers saying, okay, I'll turn off my ad blocker just because you told me and reminded me I have an ad blocker here and it's harming the site. And then the third part, which is really interesting, is that the number of consumers that choose contributor is very small, less than 1%. But it's an incredibly critical part of the decision process to understand that that's an option and that that's available to them should they want it. Our testing showed that we will not get the same rate of response for people whitelisting unless it's to them a choice, unless they're given the option to say, okay, there is a way that I can not see ads on this site. They're not forcing this. They're not jamming this down my throat. I have a choice. I have the opportunity here to decide which of the two paths I'm going to go down. And so Funding Choices has been available for a while, and it's been quite successful in terms of the publishers that have been using it. We've been rolling it out slowly because we are, as I alluded to before, looking at this tool as a means to help other issues where publishers need to message to consumers, such as GDPR. But it's been very effective where we've had it and has really become a great tool to help support overall what we're doing for ad blocking. So with that, let me just summarize again the three critical pieces that we're doing with regards to supporting the Coalition for Better Ads and the Better Ads Standard. So the Coalition has helped develop and understand through great research what is it that annoys consumers. So for the first time ever as an industry, we can understand Pop-ups are annoying consumers. Interstitial down or countdown annoying consumers. If you add that countdown, it can be okay. How big of a sticky ad can it be before you annoy consumers? What is the ad density that can be there? That's all great research that's happened with those consumers and sort of helped everyone understand what was driving consumers to use an ad blocker. But having had that standard now available, we thought that that was necessary but not sufficient in terms of really helping to get us to the point where consumers decide to turn off their ad blocker, or we can start to really see a change in the growth rate of people using ad blockers. We wanted to support that with three things. One, being able to help publishers understand, am I compliant with this better ad standard? Many publishers did not know before they had the ad experience report if they were or were not compliant with that better ad standard. So creating that tool, giving that feedback was a critical element. And it also provided a lot of learnings to us and everyone else, hopefully, that we're sharing, that the vast majority of sites were actually compliant with the better ad standard. That this really is a scenario where a small percentage of publishers are causing a problem that affects the entire industry. A classic economic tragedy that commons. Once we had that report, we wanted to be able to help to shift people away from those ad experiences through Chrome filtering, a tool that impacts only those publishers that maintain intentional noncompliance with the better ad standard, despite having been told that they're non-compliant, despite having been given time to fix any non-compliance, despite having the opportunity to actually ask for re-reviews and reconfirmation that their non-compliance is still occurring. For those publishers that maintain that state, that's when Chrome filtering comes in to protect consumers from those publishers that have decided to maintain that stance. Then finally, for the vast majority of publishers, the 98.5% that are doing absolutely nothing against the better ad standard, we've provided the funding choices solution, a messaging framework that lets publishers talk to consumers, explain that they're doing the right thing, and helps to get those consumers to click the button and say, okay, I'll whitelist this site, I'll enable ads back, bringing back those consumers to the industry. And if everyone was able to do this through funding choices or some other tool that was doing this, we would start to really be chipping away at the usage of ad blockers and the impact it's having at the industry.